streets right now.
Have been injured as rioting youth started throwing rocks at police.
Says an unjust law is no law at all.
Historic St. John's Church set under fire.
God.
Is this a war going on here?
We're really talking about our future. What type of country do we want to be?
Hello, and welcome to Holding the Line, America's Fight for Religious Freedom. American Family Association, or AFA, has been around since 1973, founded by Donald Wildman, a pastor out of South Haven, Mississippi. As their website says, they've been on the front lines of America's culture war ever since. Their opposition calls them homegrown terrorists because they fight the battles others are scared to fight when it comes to decency and religious freedom. One of those fighters is Abraham Hamilton III, the General Counsel and Policy Analyst for AFA. He's graduated from Oral Roberts and Loyola universities. I asked Abraham his thoughts on religious freedom and the First Amendment these days.
Well, I think the state of the First Amendment in America is imperiled for two reasons. One, I think many of the American citizens are unfamiliar with the history and the significance of the First Amendment, and as a result of that, it makes the amendment, or it jeopardizes the potency and the application of the amendment, because you have organizations like the ACLU, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and other organizations, in addition to activist judges, as well as politicians who are ignorant concerning these issues, who would simply have an overt hostility towards religion in general, and I would say more specifically Christianity. Those, I would say, are two potent forces that combine that jeopardizes the longevity of our ability to enjoy the freedoms that have been afforded to us by God first and are protected for us by our Constitution. I think it's very clear that free exercise of religion, as opposed to freedom to worship, is enshrined in our Bill of Rights as the first freedom, because the founders rightly concluded that the fulcrum for all liberty turns on the free exercise of religion. If you do even a cursory glance of the advances of despots and totalitarian regimes, one of the first things they always attack is the free exercise of religion. Once religion falls, all other liberty comes tumbling down soon thereafter. So I know for a fact that the Founding Fathers understood that, which is why our Declaration of Independence explains the concept of, one, us being endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, and two, the fact that freedom of the free exercise of religion is named first amongst the Bill of Rights.
There you have it. Seems pretty clear what religious freedom needs to stand for. But that's not the case with others. Militant atheist groups want to scrub the American political landscape of anything that has to do with Christianity. And I asked Abraham why he thinks they are so focused on anti-Christianity if they understood their ultimate goal.
I think the goal is very similar to Karl Marx's goal. You know, you read his works, he saw one of the primary obstacles, or should I say the chief obstacle, to the advance of his socialist utopia being Christianity. I think people understand at a heart level, at a core level, that you cannot have this secular, humanistic, utopian society with people who have the freedom to worship the Creator of heaven and earth according to their dictates. And so there's an all-out assault on the free exercise of religion and the specific exercise of Christianity in America, because if Christianity is able to be silenced and extricated from civil society, then that leaves a runway, if you will, towards humanism run amok. If our freedoms are not granted to us by God himself, then that means you have an adjustment of power, an adjustment of power source. If God is removed from the concept of liberty, then you have man, and as a result, the government of man being the sole arbiter of liberty, and then society becomes exclusively what men determine it to be.
These attacks on religion are man's attempts to determine their own liberties. So what can we do? Because once man determines our liberties, man can always change those liberties to suit those in power. Abraham had a couple interesting suggestions.
I think first and foremost, one of the things that needs to happen in order to protect our freedoms is that we need to reorient our society with constitutional literacy. The Founding Fathers intentionally crafted the Constitution to at a level to be conversant amongst housewives that are educating their children. At the time that the Constitution was drafted and even ratified, there was no such thing as government education, so homeschooling was the way to go. But the Constitution was written in such a way so that moms around their kitchen tables would be able to convey the glorious virtues and dictates of our Constitution to their children. And so I think a part of the ruse or the scheme that has been employed to keep the American people from understanding our Constitution is that they leave it in the lofty halls of the intelligentsia, whereas everyday people don't have an idea what the Constitution actually says. I mean, for example, the whole notion, separation of church and state. Well, those few words don't appear anywhere in our Constitution. But if you'd ask anybody on the street, they would say resoundingly, even confidently, surely that's in the Constitution, but it's not. Even that basic, simple concept being lost in our society is an example of how illiterate we've become toward the Constitution. I think we need to have a reorientation even amongst our churches to understand the worldview of the Founding Fathers and how a biblical worldview is integrated with the framing of our nation. At the founding era and soon thereafter, and I learned this later on, I didn't know this at the time I went to law school, but I learned in order to become a lawyer in the United States of America, the person had to have the equivalent of a seminary degree, because the transcendent understanding was, how can you grapple and understand the laws of our nation if you don't understand the laws of the God of our nation from which our laws are derived? So I think that is an ode to the reality that our churches need to become reacquainted with the worldview of the Founding Fathers and the integration between our civil government and its biblical worldview heritage.
Great ideas, Abraham. And make sure the Constitution is understood within families. And don't make it a bunch of gobbledygook that the common person can't understand. And second, help the churches understand the biblical background that went into these laws so they can teach their congregations. It's all about the Constitution and biblical literacy. So when outsiders come in and try to change the narrative, the Christians won't buy it. Abraham has seen his share of attacks firsthand, and he knows the strategy of these atheist groups.
There was a mom here who had a child in the public schools nearby, and she wanted to pray at the schools in the summertime when no kids were present, no children were present, just wanted to pray for the students, pray for the staff, pray for the upcoming school year. And this school was contacted by one of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and threatened, and they told this mom no, she couldn't pray. Well, we got wind of it here at AFA and kind of stepped in, did what we often do, contacted them to explain to them how the First Amendment works, the fact that what they were doing was actually an impediment and depriving this mom of her free exercise of religion as protected by the First Amendment. And thankfully, in that case, they reversed course, and the mom and several other moms were able to pray at the school. But the thing that is the most jarring from that is that you have to use all of these professional mechanisms to get the local public school to do something as simple as respecting the First Amendment rights of a mom. That's a scary thought, following the July 4th, 1776 Declaration of Independence to establish a nation for the free exercise of religion, where in 2017, you have a mom that has to fight for the right to pray.
On the other end of the debate are those that say, what about us? Don't we have the freedom to not hear that prayer or not see that 10 Commandment monument? I asked Abraham his thoughts, and give me a recent example of where the religious freedom battle is taking place.
For the people who would suggest that the free exercise of religion also protects the freedom to refrain from religious exercise, I agree with that wholeheartedly. But what you don't have protected in the Constitution is the freedom from objectionable expression. I mean, you don't have a freedom from the Constitution to protect you against something I just don't like that. I mean, I don't like pudding necessarily. Do I have a freedom to go to the restaurant and say, hey, you need to get rid of pudding in your restaurant because I don't like pudding? I mean, it's a ridiculous example, but it I think rightly describes the phenomenon that we're facing. And I would add in that the very liberty that people have not to worship or to be irreligious is protected all the more where religious exercise is freely protected. Trinity Lutheran is a case where you have a private Christian school that has a nursery that applied and was denied the ability to participate in a state-funded program that would use recycled rubber tires to provide safety in the playground for preschoolers. You had the previous governor in the state of Missouri that opposed Trinity Lutheran's ability to participate in that program because he saw it as an impermissible intermingling of religion and state funds. I believe the case is important because it is one that squarely brings into focus what I would suggest is the overt hostility toward religious expression in general and Christianity in particular, to where you would seek to deprive a school and its preschoolers of funding for rubber tires simply because they happen to be Trinity Lutheran, as opposed to being Trinity kickballers or, you know, sideline bootstrappers. But because they happen to be Trinity Lutheran, they can't get access to the program. And I also think it's important because I think it's a step toward what we can expect to come from this Supreme Court concerning school choice.
Our movement is called Holding the Line, a football metaphor that describes our need to push back and hold the line of religious freedom that was once there for all to enjoy, but is now in jeopardy. I asked Abraham to comment on our need to hold the line these days. And Abraham replied like the coach we need to listen to.
We don't have an option as to whether or not to hold the line. I think it was Ronald Reagan that said that freedom is never more than one generation away from being lost. And as the founders rightly understood, the fulcrum of all liberty is religious liberty. If the flame of religious liberty is extinguished in our day, words cannot describe what I think we can expect to see to come from or to come in the American populace. It is absolutely necessary. Personally, I don't think there's any bigger fight that we're faced with as a country than the fight for religious liberty and preserving the protection that we enjoy in the First Amendment. Because if we lose this battle, the very light of the gospel itself could be extinguished. We would be impeded at every hand of cascading the gospel in the most dark places, the dark segments of our society. We'll have entire generations where in previous generations, Jesus' name was welcomed and celebrated. We would have entire generations in America of children who've never heard the name of Jesus Christ. And so I don't think it's an overstatement to suggest holding the line for us is not optional. It's an absolute necessity.
Abraham is a father of 5, so the future of America is very important to him. I asked him if he was optimistic for their future.
I'm cautiously optimistic for the next generation because on the optimism side, it's because I have absolute unwavering faith in Jesus Christ and the Spirit of God and the Lord's ability to maintain for himself a witness in every generation. But the caution comes in is that I know that the Lord chooses to use people. And to date, all too often, many in the Church of God are asleep. They don't have a full estimation of the dangers. They don't have a full appreciation of the risk. And so too many are willing to just kind of check out and watch the game as opposed to getting in the game. And so it's a combination of caution and optimism based in faith in Jesus Christ. But also when I look at the landscape and the large amount of people who are completely unattached from what's actually that we're actually facing, it gives me caution for the next generation, which is why I think one of the most important things we can do as believers in America today is to equip our young people with a firm grasp on apologetics and a biblical worldview, and to encourage them and charge them with the responsibility that they have to be in their generation what Christians in the Scripture and other forefathers in the faith were to their generations.
Many of those on the opposition side of Abraham compare their attacks to Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. As a black man in the South, Abraham had an opinion on their tactic.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest travesties and one of the most galling and offensive concepts in this modern discussion balancing religious liberty and quote-unquote civil rights has been the absolute hijacking of the civil rights legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, to where you have people's private, personal, intimate space behavior being attributed to readily identifiable, immutable skin color. I think a big loss in this entire discussion happened as a result of the failure of many Christian leaders in our country, regardless of skin color, to stand up and say, hey, sexual behavior is nowhere near related to a person's skin color. When the civil rights legacy of Dr. King was established with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was based on immediately discernible, readily identifiable, immutable characteristics. I show up, you know exactly what color my skin is without me saying a word. If I show up, you don't know what my personal biological makeup may be. You don't know what my personal intimate space choices may be. And so I think that's one of the greatest travesties, because there's been, in my opinion, a downgrade and a deterioration of that civil rights legacy. And what began as a movement founded in Christianity, started in the church, is now being turned against the church and used as a spear to cause an absolute silencing and almost an extinction of the gospel in our culture. And I think that is a travesty in our society. The thing that you see repeatedly is when you abandon a biblical worldview, you end up with this hodgepodge, inconsistent logic that's applied, to where the issue no longer begins the substance of the principle. The only thing that's concerned is the personal subject opinions of the parties at play. So the desire to deny or to refuse to dress Melania Trump, how is that any different from Barronelle Stutzman's desire to refrain from offering floral arrangements for her friends? And if you remember the case with Barronelle Stutzman, it's not that she refused to serve her friends. The people that she refused to serve were longtime friends of hers, that she opened her floral shop to say, hey, you can have any floral arrangement you desire from my shop. The only objection that she had was that she did not want to use her creativity given to her by God to uniquely craft floral arrangements for something that she says, and that she, I would say, rightly recognizes is decried by Scripture. So it's an unfortunate reality that we're facing, but again, the constitutional ignorance combined with the biblical worldview ignorance sets the groundwork for the arguments to be solely engaged in on an emotional level, regardless of principle. And when that happens, we all lose. Even the people who think they're winning by opposing Barronelle Stutzman and Sweet Cakes Bakery, in the end, they even lose their ability to stand on their convictions.
Thank you, Abraham, for your insightful words. Check out American Family Association on their website and see what they're doing to protect the family in the United States. In the meantime, our fight continues, and you need to be informed. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And like this video to see more content coming your way. You can also read my book, Holding the Line, America's Fight for Religious Freedom. It's available on Amazon. Thanks for joining me, and keep holding the line.